Hello friends, if you enjoy watching super hit movies and love English language films, then you're definitely going to enjoy this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Friends, in today's video, we'll be talking about a blockbuster movie, what the movie is about, and where you can watch it. I'll be sharing all the interesting and lesser-known facts related to this film. Along with that, I'll also inform you about the platform and satellite channel where the movie is available to watch. We'll dive deep into every major aspect of the film, including the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, and box office collection. In addition, we'll discuss the complete storyline of the movie, and I'll give you a short, honest review of the film. Apart from this, we'll cover important facts about the storyline, the star cast, the performances of the actors, and which actor played which role in the film. So friends, I sincerely request you to watch this video till the very end. You don't want to miss any of it. Manila in the Claws of Light Tagalog Manila Samba Kyukoing Lumanog is a 1975 Philippine neon noir drama film directed by Lino Brocka from a screenplay written by Clo Del Mundo Jr. based on the novel In the Claws of Brightness by Edgardo Mriz. The film stars Hilda Coronel Lou Salvador Jr. Tommy Abol, and in his film debut Rafael Rocco Jr. The film features cinematography by Mike De Leon and editing by brothers Edgardo and Icar Lego. It tells the story of Julio Madiaga, a young man from the province of Marinduque who arrives in Manila for a mission to find his lover Leah. While making plans for his mission, he has to survive the conditions in the capital city, contending with issues like crime and prostitution. It is one of the many films in the Philippines released during the Marcos era, which lasted until the 1986 revolution, and in retrospect one of the few films to gain international critical recognition. It is widely considered the greatest Philippine film of all time by voters, especially the local and international filmmakers and critics. Julio Madiaga is a young man from the island of Marinduque who arrives in Manila in 1970. From time to time, he passes by the corner of Anpen and Misericordia, staring at a peculiar building from a distance. While pursuing his quest, he has to work to survive urban life. At first, Julio works in construction, and at the site, he befriends co-worker Ah Tek, who was hired some 5 weeks before. Another co-worker advises Julio that city life is quite difficult without the income to enjoy urban comforts. Julio begins to slowly observe the harsh reality of society, culminating in the accidental death of a worker. One day, Julio and Ah Tek shop for clothes at a marketplace when a woman dressed in black and wearing sunglasses catches Julio's attention. She reminds him of Mrs. Cruz, the woman who brought his girlfriend Leah to Manila for schooling. Julio runs through the crowd to follow the woman and tries to approach her. But before he can say anything, the lady shrieks in distress. Julio flees to not make a scene, running back to Ah Tek and leaving the marketplace with him. This is followed by other occasions of spotting Mrs. Cruz, leading Julio to discover that Ligo was brought to Manila for prostitution. He continues encountering people in Manila, including callboys, male prostitutes, and the relatives of coworkers, eventually reuniting with former workmate Paul, who supported him earlier and was a good friend. Julio eventually locates Liga, and she explains everything that has happened to her since leaving home. Julio plans with Leah to return to Marinduque with her 4-month-old baby. They agree to meet at Errant Market, but she fails to appear at the appointed time. Despondent, Julio returns to Paul's home where he's been staying. Paul informs him the next day that Leah died that night. She allegedly fell down a flight of stairs, but her bruising suggests she was killed by ACH, the man who rented her from Mrs. Cruz and kept her and their baby imprisoned. Enraged, Julio stalks Ah Tek, whom he saw at Leah's funeral. The following night, Julio goes to AK's house and kills him. Afterward, a mob pursues, corners, and strikes the fearful Julio. A heavenly silhouette of Liga is shown as the film fades to white, then sky blue. Rafael Ro Jr. as Julio Madiaga, the 21-year-old protagonist who hails from Marinduque, wandering Manila in search of his lover, Leah. He starts the narrative as a patient if naive character only to gradually transform into a weary and vengeful person. Hilda Coronel as Leah Parzo, the betrothed of Julio. She was brought away to Manila with the thought of getting proper education only to wind up getting entrapped in sexual slavery. Her name literally translates to joyful paradise. Lou Salvador Jr. as Ateng, a construction worker Julio befriends. Ateng serves as Julio's guide to the plight of the working class and, in effect, Manila, helping him cope with the unpleasantness of the city. He later gets wrongfully arrested and meets his demise at the hands of fellow inmates. Tommy Abol as Paul, a friend of Julio, who also acts as his confidant. He serves as Julio's guide to the impoverished districts of Manila. Steadfast and loyal, Paul also offers his help and gives advice to Julio whenever needed. Jojo Abella as Bobby, a call boy Julio befriends. He serves as Julio's guide to the world of male prostitution. An attraction towards Julio is implied. Pio de Castro as Imo, a colleague of Julio from the construction site. He was initially poor at the start of the narrative, but has later improved his lifestyle. Junie Gamboa as Oming, another colleague of Julio from the construction site. Pancho Palia as Mr. Balajadea, one of the antagonists of the story. He is the foreman of the construction site Julio worked in. Arrogant and selfish, he often treated his subordinates unfairly. Juling Babaldo as Mrs. Cruz, one of the antagonists of the story, an unsavory character who recruits unsuspecting young provincial women to her prostitution ring. It was speculated by Julio that Mrs. Cruz may not even be her real name, but rather an alias. Tommy Yap is a Czech, one of the antagonists of the story. He is an unscrupulous mestizo Dongli who bought Lia from Mrs. Cruz's prostitution ring and made her his kept woman. The film is based on a story Samo ang Luanog lit in the Claws of Brightness, written by Edgardo Reyes. It was originally serialized in Louis magazine from 1966 to 1967 and was later published into a novel. The adaptation into film originally started out life as a writing exercise. In 1970, Inino de Manila graduate Clolo del Mundo Jr. re-enrolled in his alma mater to take a short course in film writing. There he wrote Peapod Artista, a screenplay he would later revisit in the 2000s. Del Mundo finished his script for Peapod Artista, which was supposed to be a major assignment, by the middle of the semester, earlier than what was expected. His professor Nestor Tor requested him to make another screenplay as way of filling in the extra time. Because he had just written an original screenplay, Del Mundo tried his hand at adapting a literary source for a change. He chose Rhea's story, already a novel by then, as the subject for his next assignment. After turning in the spec script, Del Mundo completed his course and relocated to the United States to continue his studies at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. Mike DeLeon, grandson to Narcissus DeLeon of LVN Pictures, had directed one short film and intended to expand his role in the film industry, namely as a producer. DeLeon had just put up a new production company, Cinema Artists, and was in the process of seeking out projects. Eventually, DeLeon remembered of Del Mundo's trial adaptation. Having been friends since their days at Inino de Manila, DeLeon contacted Del Mundo with the idea of producing the latter's spec script. Del Mundo, who just returned from his 4-year course in Kansas, gave DeLeon his blessing and agreed to further polish the screenplay. It was the right time, Del Mundo recalls. Citation needed. Lo Bra, who had just received acclaim for his previous work, Tainamang Kangit Kalong, was approached by DeLeon to direct the adaptation. Braha took this as an opportunity to create a commentary about urban poverty amidst the Marcos dictatorship and included homosexual themes not present in the original source. Braha understood the popular audience well. Del Mundo says he suggested additions to the screenplay of The Claws of Light to make it more commercial. It was fun working with him, although he was quite emotional. The production title was eventually changed from Samba Kug Lumanog to Manila Samba Kyuko ng Lumanog lit translation Manila in The Claws of Light to emphasize on the setting of the story. An independent production, The Claws of Light was produced with a modest budget for Cinema Artists' principal photography occurred in 1974. The film was shot on actual locations around the vicinity of Manila to better capture the authenticity of the city. Jayala Jen, who had previously acted in Breo's films, initially played the lead role of Julio Madiaga. Having already participated in several days of shooting, Ilagan was asked to drop out of the production when Bra became dissatisfied with the performance. Upon viewing the dailies, Bra was convinced that Olagon, who had a very healthy appearance, did not meet his vision of Julio, a pitiful vagrant that wades in and around the urban gutters. The role was recast with newcomer Bimble Rocco in the part. Prior to this film, Rocco's only foray into acting was a relatively small role in Bra's previous film 321. For this film, he was credited under his real name of Raphael Rowe Jr. The Claws of Light marked what would become the first lead role for Rocco. To play the love of Julio's life, Bra chose Hilda Coronel for the role of Ligaya Paraiso Lou Salvador Jr., a former matinee idol famous for playing in strident romantic leads in LVN's teen rebel pictures, was cast against TYP as the wise and sympathetic Atang character. Actor Tommy Yap was cast as the rarely seen antagonist Ah Tek. Yap would later appear, albeit less significantly, in Bras in alongside Coronel. The majority of the actors that round out the film, such as Tommy Abol and Junie Gamboa, were veterans of both the stage and radio. Rotten Tomatoes, a review aggregator, reports that 100% of 5 surveyed critics gave the film a positive review. The average rating is 8.4/10. Manila Dargaz of the New York Times made it a NYT Critics Pick and wrote, "The movie's palpable, deeply lived-in realism is among its great attractions, largely because the film isn't just a story about a young Filipino everyman, but because it's also a de facto record of Manila in the 1970s. Ingu Kong of The Village Voice wrote, "The intimate proletarian melodrama, The Claws of Light, succeeds where so many political allegories fail with ethical and emotional sophistication. It dramatizes the suffering of the disadvantaged with characters that feel individual yet archetypal." Meanwhile, Jose Capo, writing for the Criterion Collection, noted that the film was met with charges of anti-Chinese racism from reviewers. Keith Ulick of Time Out New York rated it 4/5 stars and wrote that it is widely and understandably considered one of the pinnacles of Filipino cinema. Alan Jones of Slant Magazine rated it 4.5/5 stars and called the film a precursor to A Touch of Sin. In a retrospective essay reflecting on the film's enduring relevance nearly 50 years after its 1975 release, Paul Emmanuel Anicola of The Movie Buff described Manila in The Claws of Light as a searing indictment. Every institution from labor to media to law enforcement fails the characters. Their story isn't rare. It's ordinary. And that's what makes it devastating. The film won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor at the 1976 FAMAS Awards. Manila is one of the few Filipino films that has been consistently placed among the world's top 100 films of all time. It is the only film from the Philippines that entered in the list of the book 101 Movies You Must See Before You Die. It was shown as part of the Cannes Classic section of the 2013 Cannes Film Festival. A stage adaptation of the film was released in 2017, directed by Joel Laminin. It was presented by Grand Leisure Corporation and features music by Van Guzman, choreography by Douglas Nair, and production design by June Flavier Pablo. The musical starred Armin Farah as Julio Madiaga, Sheila Valderrama Martinez as Ligaya Paraiso with Laura Mick as alternate, Floyd Tina as Paul, Noel Reyes as Atang, Isel Santons as Para, with Rita Daniela as alternate, Dulce as Mrs. Cruz, with Ayame Castro as alternate. Manila in The Claws of Light was restored in 4K resolution in 2013. The restoration was performed by World Cinema Foundation and the Film Development Council of the Philippines at Cintetica di Bologna. Limagine Retrovita Laboratory in association with LVN Cinema Artists Philippines and Mike De Leon. The restored film premiered at the 2013 Cannes Film Festival as part of the Cinema Classic section and was released in the Philippines on August 7, 2013. The restored film was released on DVD and Blu-ray as part of the Criterion Collection on June 12, 2018. Julio Madiaga, a Provincial, arrives in Manila to search for his beloved Liga. Julio Madiaga, a simple fisherman from the province, travels to Manila to find Liga, the woman he loves, who went away with a mysterious woman who promised her a better future in the city. When he arrives, he becomes immersed in the city lifestyle and gets involved with its inhabitants, experiencing extreme poverty, hard luck, and the overbearing need to grind for daily sustenance. While Julio relentlessly searches for Liga, the city changes him little by little, and he becomes like an animal doomed to live only for survival in a wild, inescapable jungle. Terrence 16. Julio Madiaga is a young man from the island of Marinduque who arrives in Manila in 1970. From time to time, he passes by the corner of a nen and Misericordia staring at a peculiar building from a distance. While pursuing his quest, he has to work to survive urban life. At first, Julio works in construction, and at the site, he befriends co-worker Atang Lu Salvador Jr., who was hired some 5 weeks before. Another co-worker advises Julio that city life is quite difficult without the income to enjoy urban comforts. Julio begins to slowly observe the harsh reality of society, culminating in the accidental death of a worker. One day, Julio and Atang shop for clothes at a marketplace when a woman dressed in black and wearing sunglasses catches Julio's attention. She reminds him of Mrs. Cruz, the woman who brought his girlfriend Leah to Manila for schooling. Julio runs through the crowd to follow the woman and tries to approach her, but before he can say anything, the lady shrieks in distress. Julio flees to not make a scene, running back to Atang and leaving the marketplace with him. This is followed by other occasions of spotting Mrs. Cruz, leading Julio to discover that Liga was brought to Manila for prostitution. He continues encountering people in Manila, including callboys, male prostitutes, and the relatives of coworkers, eventually reuniting with former workmate Paul, who supported him earlier and was a good friend. Julio eventually locates Liga, Hilda Cornell, and she explains everything that has happened to her since leaving home. Julio plans with Liga to return to Marinduque with her 4-month-old baby. They agree to meet at Errant Market, but she fails to appear at the appointed time. Despondent, Julio returns to Paul's home where he's been staying. Paul informs him the next day that Leah died that night. She allegedly fell down a flight of stairs, but her bruising suggests she was killed by ACH, the man who rented her for Mrs. Cruz and kept her and their baby imprisoned. Enraged, Julio stalks ACH, whom he saw at Liga's funeral. The following night, Julio goes to AK's house and kills him. Afterward, a mob pursues, corners, and attacks the fearful Julio. A heavenly silhouette of Liga is shown as the film fades to white, then sky blue. I have to admit something rather embarrassing on my end. Being Filipino by roots, I haven't seen much Filipino cinema. And even more embarrassing is that I've only rushed out for Lav Diaz films. That's not to say Diaz is a bad filmmaker, but from the many Filipino filmmakers working today, he was the only one I ever found myself familiar with, and he was the only priority I had from then. Although recently, I came back from a 3-week vacation in the Philippines, which soon got me to thinking that I should change my own viewing habits in the meantime. I was recommended Lobra's Manila in the Claws of Light for quite some time already, and after hearing praises of it supposedly being the greatest Filipino film ever made, me having finally seen it now only has excitement fueled for what more there is to explore. Lobra's film tells a story of poverty during the Marcos administration and in turn offers a scathing critique upon the society, which came as a result of the poor economy while at the same time never turning away from his trademark homosexual theme. Bra was openly gay and always incorporated such themes into his work. Adapted from In the Claws of Brightness by Edgardo Reyes. The story revolves around the young Julio played by newcomer Bimbo Rocco as he weaves from his poor background from Mandic to the big city of Manila in order to search for his long-lost love meaning joyful paradise after she was supposedly brought away in order to supposedly get a proper education only to find the naive young soul transform into something of power as he witnesses Manila's criminal underworld. Julio's character arc is one among many things that helps give Manila in the Claws of Light the power it carries, only to be aided more by a powerful performance from Bimbo Rocco, who was shot up to prominence after taking the lead role. Heading from an environment of one background to another, and then lingering in another after seeing so much devastation coming abroad, everything here is ripe material for Lobra to allow his social commentary to be as scathing as it is. It feels so much like an Italian neo-realist picture. Perhaps in a way it could be the Philippines' answer to such films. Julio is a character defined by what the world around him has brought himself to a perspective traumatized by the poor economy of his home and the seediness of what supposedly is a higher class structure. Romance is one thing that Manila, in the claws of light, can be taken for. But perhaps it is only a coding for more tragedies that are set to come forward. Julio's search for Liga soon brings him to discover the world of sex trafficking after it turns out Ligaya was brought into Manila in order to become a prostitute. There's a struggle that poverty endures as highlighted by Bra in such a work. But at the same time, the critiques that are present at such malice towards the lower class as shown here allow for something more significant to come about given as such struggles are still present in our world today. At the supposed claws of light. As the title highlights, it may be that there is a hint towards how the supposed brightness of a higher class turns out to be a trap for something much more dangerous at hand. Something that stood out most within the way Lino Brocka shows all of this happening in front of our eyes. Yet friendship is still bound amidst fellow construction worker Ah Tek, who serves as his guide through the unpleasantness of the city. But perhaps in Julio himself, what is being represented is an entire economy that only goes down more and more if everything moves in the direction to which it does and only allows for damage all throughout. Especially with his change of character, starting a naive young slum boy to an angry revenge seeker. Had something about this film hit me more than anything, it would be the final shot, possibly the most haunting that I've witnessed in such a long while. Anger has taken its fullest form and Julio realizes upon this moment where his shift in character has taken him, highlighting the tragedy all the more as we finish on a close-up shot of his terrified face. It is never clear what happens to him after that. But quite evidently, Lino Brocka was exposing a rooted anger as it gets more violent and uncontrollable. It could be the best way to describe Manila in the claws of light. Though a tragedy as defined by anger upon a poor economy's effect on society, just as the higher class is soon corrupted by their own power, it's incredible enough considering how much Lino Brocka decides to expose during the time in which the film had come out. But everything came clear with that final shot about why I can't let it leave my head. When I first watched Manila in the claws of light Manila Sambicuco ng Lumanog in Filipino in our class, I did not completely understand the dialogues between the characters, mostly due to the music or background noises being far louder than the voices. My teacher said that it was because of the speaker, not the film itself. Regardless, I paid little attention to the film, instead writing it off as another film trying to portray something deep, but ends up stumbling in its own overambition. However, when I did some research on this film as a guide for this review, I was shocked to see its incredibly high reviews and is considered as the greatest Filipino film ever made. Additionally, it has the honor of being the only Philippine film included in the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. As a result, I decided to watch the film again with a better and clearer viewing experience, since I might have judged the film too harshly. Now that I've watched and fully understood it, I agree why Manila, in the Claws of Light deserves its tremendous praise and recognition. Manila in the Claws of Light is a 1975 Filipino drama film directed by Lino Brocka that narrates the hardships of Julio Madiaga played by Lino Brocka as he scoured the city of Manila in search of his girlfriend Ligaya Paraiso played by Hilda Coronel. Liga was brought to Manila from the province of Marinduque by a woman named Mrs. Cruz under the promise of education. However, as Julio spends more time in Manila, he slowly learns of the true intentions of Mrs. Cruz and the fate and location of Liga after seeing Mrs. Cruz frequent the trading company building of Ah Tek, a mestizo diangli, also known as a Chinese Filipino. Alongside his search for Liga, Julio also struggles to survive in the harsh conditions of Manila. Initially working as a construction worker and earning extremely low income, he meets new people along his journey, all with their own ways of coping with the harsh reality of Manila. Ah Tek, a fellow construction worker who befriends Julio and schools him about the conditions in Manila. Perla, Ah Tek's sister, who nurses their paralyzed father Paul, Julio's friend from Marinduque, and now serves as his confidant, and who also has a secret liking to Para. Bobby, a call boy who teaches Julio about male prostitution and how it can support him financially, and many more who have minor roles. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio and Liga have their last talk before Liga leaves the province with Mrs. Cruz to Manila. A huge factor as to why the movie is so powerful is that each character's story is so central to the theme of the film. Characters with likable personalities are shown to undergo hardships in the city, while those who have it easy are portrayed as stubborn, abusive, and greedy. The film focuses on the unfair and unjust conditions in Manila and does not shy away with the realistic portrayal of these conditions. Ah Tek was wrongfully arrested for a petty crime and was killed in prison. The neighborhood where Perla and her paralyzed father lives mysteriously burned down, killing the father and leaving Perla with nothing, causing her to go into prostitution in order to support herself. Benny, a fellow construction worker of Julio, who wishes to be a hit singer in the future, is killed in a construction accident. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Benny is killed after accidentally falling to his death in a construction accident. The characters who suffers the most in the film are the protagonists Julio and Ligaya. Later in the movie, Julio is laid off in his construction job and is unable to support himself. He meets Bobby, a call boy, who convinces him into prostitution as a last-ditch source of income. He reluctantly agrees, but discontinues this line of work after only one customer. Fortunately, Paul was kind enough to help Julio financially for some time. After Julio was finally able to find Ligaya, she discloses to him that she was actually brought into a prostitution ring under Aiko Dongli from earlier. She added that Mrs. Cruz, which might only be an alias, only pretended to bring her to Manila for education. Julio learns that Liga had a baby, the father of whom was not disclosed, who is closely guarded somewhat as a hostage by a nanny under AKS pay. And this is why she cannot leave AKS building. Despite this, they both hatch up a plan to escape together with her baby back to Marinduquite. However, Ligaya fails to arrive at the meeting place for their escape. Paul informs Julio the next day that Ligaya died due to her falling down the stairs inside AKS building. Paul also adds that the accident might have resulted from a struggle with ACH due to the presence of marks on her neck. Enraged, Julio storms into the building, confronts ACH near the entrance, and stabs him repeatedly to death. A mob of onlookers outside notices the bloody happening, concludes that Julio is a cold-blooded murderer, then chases him. They successfully corner him. They ready themselves to beat him up, and the film ends with a close-up of Julio's terrified face, screaming silently. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio weeps and his screams of terror are muted as the mob is about to beat him up, presumably to a brutal death, ending the film on a dark and horrific image. In most movies, if a protagonist encounters problems and hindrances, they find a way to overcome it and all goes resolved at the end. This film excels in doing exactly the opposite. The audiences root for Julio to be able to find Liga and escape together after everything they've went through. But that's not how reality works. Reality is unfair and the film portrays that in a depressing manner. Liga is killed by her abusive master and Julio is presumably killed for taking his revenge on Lia's murder. This depiction by the film may be influenced due to the era that this movie was produced. The film was shot in the 1970s and was released on 1975 during the time when martial law was still in effect nationwide. The Philippines was in a state of chaos during this period with countless human abuses, incidences, and injustices which may have had an impact on Bra's direction of the film. The film also has lots of symbolism littered all throughout. The characters' names are one example. Julio's last name Madiaga sounds similar to Madiaga, which is persevering in Filipino, a trait that Julio has. Ligaya Paraiso's name translates to joy paradise, and her unfortunate demise in the film may be interpreted as the state of bliss and happiness being unfairly taken away from hardworking Filipinos. Additionally, there is a reason why the city of Manila was the chosen setting of this film. Back then, numerous people from provinces migrate into Manila to partake of the numerous avenues for income. However, what is not known is that it is hard to thrive in the city if you do not have the financial stability. Because of this, many provincials end up becoming squatters, earning enough to support themselves, but not enough to improve their lifestyles. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio unwillingly tries prostitution, desperate to have a source of income. The theme of prostitution is also very prominent in this film. This is because of the fact that a majority of women were mistreated during the 70s, 80s in the Philippines. Numerous cases of abuse were left unheard, mostly due to the effect of martial law and the prevailing machismo climate. Additionally, because of the widespread poverty at the time, prostitution served as a way to earn income for both male and female. However, it can also be used illegally, as shown in the film. The prostitutes under their masters earn just enough to support themselves, but cannot earn any additional money to be able to escape their masters. In a technical aspect, the film also excels in using the cinematography to symbolize the character's emotions and circumstances. Just by looking at the angle that a character is looking, you can already deduce the emotion they're feeling. The color and shadows are also utilized in order to show the state that these characters are in. Just by looking at these angles, you can already guess the emotions that Julio is experiencing at these scenes. Another technical aspect that I loved in this film is the usage of contrasts for the film to show how unjust the conditions in Manila are. There are usually extremely opposite objects or scenarios that are shown in scenes such as Leah's depressingly empty vigil beside someone else's vigil brimming with visitors, and Julio's depressing sleep in a bright and bustling park. Top set of images. Julio rests in a park after being laid off from his only job. Surrounded by exciting and colorful lights of buildings, bottom set of images, a wake with lots of visitors is shown beside Leah's empty wake, showing a cruel reminder of isolation. In conclusion, I am immensely happy to be proven wrong about my initial thoughts of this movie. The movie was able to illustrate serious and deep topics without sensationalizing or being unnecessarily overdramatic. The characters feel natural and have their own personalities that affect each other in their own ways. The portrayal of events here resemble a real and tragic depiction of history. From the sad reality of Provincials who came to the city thinking it would be an excellent place to have a job to the dark reality of prostitution and abuse. This film paints a reminder of what history felt for some people at that time and the suffering that they had to live through. It's a story of the injustice and cruelty of Philippine history. And this is the reason why I consider Manila in the Claws of Light to be one of the greatest Philippine films of all time. Lobraw's Manila in the Claws of Light is a solid film, but more a social document than effective drama. A dirty corner of the street. Late evening. Julio Madiaga's face in the lamplight. The vibrancy of his eyes is caught in desperation. A silhouette in the window above him. A woman arranges her hair. A memory from a past paradise flashes into frame. Madiaga had a girlfriend once upon a time. Their paths diverged after a cruel woman took her away on a boat to the capital. She vanished shortly thereafter. He can only guess at her fate, but the city provides him with many educated guesses. The pimps who cajole him on the curb with their wares, prostitutes often blank-faced or simply faceless, suggest some sinister end. Already the city has battered him into destitution. And on the intersection of Misericordia and Ongan, what he's come from the provincial town of his birth to find is barred behind a rectangle of light which immobilizes him, brightens every twitch on his face, and discloses the answer to his question within a shadow, the claws of light. Indeed, illumination in this story is no comfort and often is representative of some misery of either Madiaga or more cogently the city, which consumes him. Manila in the Claws of Light draws strength from scenes like the one described above, when the plot stops to recontextualize the emotions it traffics in interrupting what is essentially an over 2-hour-long document of despair. It is a delicate moment full of longing, and Bimble Rocco gets much of the credit for he possesses great sensitivity of expression, and the script makes no serious demands on him save for the kind of youthful naive that is suitable for a Provino like Julio Madiaga in a film without any bravura visuals. The only distinctive technique used is flashbacks edited to literally flash across the screen for a second or two. Unique plot twists or any truly interesting characters, specifically characters whose potential are never capitalized on, small moments like this make the long slog more bearable. The film's main lack is not so much unrelenting grimness as it is its refusal to go deeper. The simplicity of the story's logic doesn't help. Manila is a center of corruption and urban squalor, destroying innocence, punishing idealism, breeding mindless violence, etc. Chained as they are to this trajectory, the characters just suffer and are only rarely given a sense of life apart from their suffering. Take Madiaga, for example. His arc is a downward curve. The film begins with him having been in Manila for quite some time, homeless and unemployed. He is hired at a construction site and collapses from hunger on his first day. He commiserates with his coworkers who are all poor and have for the most part resigned themselves to their fate. The only one who hasn't, a student named Imo, chides them for their lack of ambition. By the end, Imo is the only one to escape the drudgery of hard labor after nabbing an advertisement job which he promptly lords over his friends. Another worker is Benny, a carefree man who is content with his life as a laborer until a freak accident at the site kills him due to his carelessness. Then there's a Tang, who takes Julio in, even letting him stay a night in his cramped house in the slums. They get caught in Julio's orbit for a time, discovering along with the viewer the reason Julio is in Manila to find Leah, his hometown love, who was brought to Manila by a mysterious Mrs. Cruz for a supposed work opportunity. He was able to track Mrs. Cruz to a building owned by a Chinese man named Chuek. However, after an effort to get inside was rebuffed. He's been stranded outside, waiting for any sign of Liga on the premises. The rest of the film follows Madiaga's travails in the city. It is one crushing disappointment after another. After being laid off at the construction site, Julio even has a brief stint as a male prostitute in the underground gay community of Manila with the assistance of Bobby Reyes. Reyes is one of the film's potentially interesting characters. A young, handsome, relatively well-off callboy who nevertheless denies his homosexuality. Why Reyes so quickly attempts to entice Miga into his lifestyle after a chance encounter at a park is never made clear. It ends with Julio parting from Reyes immediately after his first time as a callboy goes awry. He reconnects with Paul, a friend he met at a previous job. When another work opportunity arises, they go to recruit a Tang, only to find out he was murdered after an altercation with a corrupt boss. A Tang's sister Pa is left alone to take care of their paralyzed father, wounded after losing a battle over family territory to a Spanish businessman. But when Paul and Julio try to help her out, a fire burns their house to the ground, wounding the father even further and driving Perla to prostitution to eke out a living. Then, miraculously, Julio finally discovers Leah at a church. They sleep together and Leah reveals that Mrs. Cruz is a sex trafficker who travels the Filipino countryside abducting young girls like Leah with a scam story about working in the city to send money back home only to be sold into sex slavery. Any resistance is met with the threat of forced morphine addiction. The two plan an escape back to their hometown with Leah's child sired by Chuetek, who confines her to their home on pain of death. But Liga fails to show up to the appointed location. He is crestfallen, but Paul later informs him that she was killed by Chuek when he found out about their plan. They attend Leah's funeral and afterwards enraged, Julio goes to Chuek's home and stabs him to death. This is done in plain view, however, so a mob quickly forms and corners Julio in an alley. Manila in the Claws of Light's closing scene is a close-up of Julio's screaming, tear-stricken face as the citizen rushes to deal out death. This is a puzzling choice. Despite how Bra and Clulo Del Mundo Jr., who adapted the screenplay from a novel by Edgardo Moriz, sets the finale up. Several moments of a sudden urge for violence overtaking Julio are interspersed throughout the film, characterized by frenetic camera movements focusing in on his widened eyes and shaking fists. The idea is that the corruption of the city, dirty cops, sex trafficking, capitalism run riot slowly creeps under his skin until he is forced to retaliate, violently killing the man who murdered Leah and faced zero legal repercussion. At the same time, Julio is portrayed as a very soft, vulnerable person seen playing with children and small animals, easily folding when his wages are withheld by his boss, getting completely manhandled when a cop abuses him on the street. That these aspects of Julio are forced together without a smooth transition from one state to the next. Meet country boy to violent murderer makes Manila in the Claws of Light more of a parable than the gritty realistic crime drama it is often touted as being. One never gets a look into Julio's psyche as this litany of suffering persists, or any character's psyche for that matter. They exist to be oppressed and to W under their oppression until it becomes too much, and they lash out only to be crushed by forces greater than they comprehend. A Tang speaks out against their boss's corruption and is assassinated in jail. As a result, Liga wishes to help her poor provincial family out financially and is made a sex slave. Julio simply wants to find his girlfriend. His desire is met with abuse, potential sex work, and finally death. E.T., etc. Leah's full name in fact translates to something like beautiful paradise. This paired with the idyllically framed flashbacks to Julio's childhood home adds to the film's parabolic nature. It's a moral warning against degradation which seems to stem from the urban grime represented by Manila as opposed to the pastoral beauty of the province. When Julio wanders in the city at night, after losing the construction job, neon signs of global corporations flare behind his head as another example of light's malevolence and the boot of Western hegemony which looms in the shadows as the film's smaller corruptions take their course. It's a stale moralism, though, and with little attempt on the part of the filmmakers to offset the monotonous darkness, such moralism comes across as lecturing and, worst of all, dull. On a brighter note, the performances are uniformly solid. Again, Bimbo Rocco's Provinciano naive is believable, even though one senses the specter of plot convenience when he commits acts of utter stupidity, like not assaulting Mrs. Cruz in broad daylight. Hilda Coronel as Leah is quite good, especially in her sad monologue to Julio after lovemaking. Although this, as well as Pearl's breakdown earlier in the film, is yet another straightforward entry of suffering with both treated a tad too melodramatically. Her best moment is when Julio confronts her in the church, and they lock eyes for the first time outside of Julio's reminiscences. It's the sort of acting done with the minutest of details, as there's no visible double-taking, and she lets the shock hang on that small silence between recognition and response. Jojo Abella as Reyes is good with the episode involving the cowboys of Manila injecting much-needed levity to the proceedings. Although I struggled to see why it was included since it has little meaningful impact on Julio. Brocka thought it would add to the film's realistic nature, and insofar as it sheds light on the existence of Manila's underground gay community. This is correct. But does it add to the core drama of his story? I would say no. Although I suspect Brocka as a gay man felt some empathy for these characters. For what it's worth, it shows since the subplot is largely free of any cheap luridness a less aware director might choose to engage in. There's one scene, though, that gives insight into the psyches of these sufferers. It's a slim look, just a peek really, and it happens right before Paul breaks the news of Liga's death to Julio. They're eating at a favorite restaurant of Paul's. He dances around the issue for a moment, and then seemingly out of nowhere tells Julio about the fakirs in India who walk on burning coals without feeling pain. He challenges Julio. Paul, think you could do that? Think you could put out that cigarette in your palm? Julio, I get burned for sure. Paul, put it out in mine. Julio, just one beer, and you're already drunk. Paul, come on. Go ahead, Julio. Forget it. Paul, if you won't, then I will. He extinguishes the stub on his palm. Tommyable as Paul plays it low-key, letting the pain simmer underneath his expression as his friend watches in disturbed fascination. Why does he do this? Perhaps Christ-like, Paul wants to take some of Julio's pain on himself. Does he want to steal Julio in preparation for what's coming? Or is Paul put off by the total passivity Julio has displayed throughout the film, letting both fortune and misfortune crash upon him at will and seeks to shock him into some emotion? Why do any of these long sufferers do what they do? Regretful, void of aspiration, they slave away under an oppressor's grip. The land they occupy resembles hell with no end in sight to their punishments. Like those processions in which scores of penitents fog themselves in religious ecstasy, there must be some self-compulsion to their torture, withholding them from Mayamo's ambition, however tawdry, and rendering them choice targets for those above them. In the midst of total despair, how could there not be? Only Julio Media seems attached to something transcendent, haunted by memories more luminous than anything else in the film. For this, he is dealt with accordingly. It is a bleak end and hardly deserving. But ask yourself, so clearly trapped between shadow and light, Liga's enshrouded face, as absent of a smile as it was in life, was his doom in the wake of such a sequence of events ever in question of all making it in the big city sorts of movies. Lo Breo's Manila in the Claws of Light 1975 is among the bleakest. one of several films the activist and formerly commercially minded filmmaker directed in the 1970s to realistically depict poverty and struggle under the era's President Ferdinand Marcos, who subjected the country's movies to strict censorship that forced anything resembling critique to be oblique. The 1970s set film's narrative is most of all preoccupied with a mystery. Leah Hilda Coronel, the girlfriend of a scrawny 21-year-old named Julio Madiaga, has absconded from their shared home of Marinduque in pursuit of a better life. It's specifically one that will supposedly be brought from a factory job and higher education opportunity offered by an enigmatic woman known only as Mrs. Cruz, Juling Babaldo, who visits the province one afternoon. She convinces the families of 3 women, including Liga, to come back with her to the capital city. It seems too good to be true, and it'll be confirmed eventually that it is. Liga wrote back home a few times with vague missives. A suspicious drop-off prompts Julio, who'd been making a living as a fisherman, to come to Manila to track her down. Manila in the Claws of Light begins a few months into his search, during which he spent the majority of his time when not finding here and their construction gigs standing outside the ostensible textile factory where Liga had been promised work. It's a monotonous existence made harsher by the conditions with which he and his fellow construction workers have to contend. Bosses take a good chunk out of an already meager day's pay. And work sites are so shoddily set up no one is given hard hats or other appropriate attire to protect themselves that it's not uncommon for someone to be killed on the job. Like one young man with pop singer aspirations whose lethal fall one afternoon is framed by the men's boss as nothing more than a to-be-ignored distraction his friends and colleagues are using as an excuse to not continue with their shift's backbreaking work. Manila in the Claws of Light's early scenes are indicative of the moonlessness of the film to come. They also feature some of its most moving moments. In a life where neither the government nor employers can be relied on to act in good faith, Julio's peers are the first to help him in moments of need. They hand over a sandwich after he passes out during his first shift, which he starts after not eating anything for more than a day, and they offer him a place to stay when he admits to not having one. The movie is mostly set in Manila's spread of shanty towns. Brocka solicitously considers the financial desperation inside and the interpopulation solidarity that can emerge when no one can be counted on besides each other. Finding the construction work from which Julio has barely been able to save money is precarious. He will mid-move by happenstance, meet a man Bobby Jojo Abella who does sex work and invites Julio to join the stable of which he and some other call boys are a part. Julio hesitantly goes through with servicing a client. Though the money is far better than what he'd made doing the work in which he has more experience, the professional pivot for him is, as a heterosexual man, too uncomfortable to continue gritting his teeth through. The movie is forward-thinking in its sex work is work. The subtle way male versus female autonomy in the profession is underscored. Though that section of the film is also one you wish was shaded in more. There's a reason why Julio's eventual distancing of himself from sex work feels abrupt. Brocka had apparently originally shot a succession of thematically aligned scenes in Evening in a Gay Bar. Shot down flirtations from Bobby, but excised them from the final cut. The film's subsequent restoration efforts, not including those moments either. Some have taken issue with gay sex work's rock-bottom framing. I see it less that way, partly because Brocka had been a few years earlier responsible for making a sensitive movie about homosexuality, when few were doing that sort of thing, and more broadly, as an italicizing that the more financially desperate you are in a society-parched opportunity, the likelier you are to involve yourself with what you wouldn't otherwise. Julio and Leah's relationship as it's represented in the film mostly takes place in quick, but no less emotionally vivid flashbacks in Marukit. They're photographed by co-producer and cinematographer Mike DeLeon with a peaceful glitteriness that makes the ache Julio feels for the comparatively conflict-free past tangible. Most of what we see there finds the lovers in front of the sun-reflecting ocean whose visual endlessness, and which must be joured through in order to reach Manila, confers an optimism the movie's increasingly depressing circumstances have a way of recasting as cruel and taunting the more often Julio daydreams about it in purgatorial Manila. Manila in the Claws of Light's dramatic success hinges on Julio and Leah's reunion, which only seems less likely to happen the worse things get. It's a shock when it does. It also provides no relief for the sweaty mullies preceding it, given what Leah will reveal about her time in Manila in a frantic anguished monologue delivered by an excellent coronal. She next worked with Bra on the gutting 1976 revenge film In Siang, in which she has a meteor part. Working from a screenplay by Clolo Del Mundo Jr. itself. An adaptation of some serialized short stories by Edgardo Mariz that were published in the Tagalog language magazine Luiwe Bra allows us to feel like Julio, a flicker of hope while poised for its extinguishing. Even if Liga can break free of her particular waking nightmare, she and Julio will still be subjected to the difficulties of surviving in a city one character observes is only existentially tenable if you have plenty of money with which to cushion yourself. Manila in the claws of light might feel more miserable for the sake of it if realities like Julio and Liga weren't common under Marcos's rule. Whether or not its misery seems excessive is in any case a courageous rendering, since Marcos so adamantly barred movies from being critical of his rule and as a result saw Filipino cinema during his reign be mostly defined by a political escapist fare. That Bra was nonetheless able to get his decidedly, if a slightly unflattering DeMarcos film released, and have it be met with international praise remains impressive. Though that ability to skirt around restrictions wouldn't remain the case for long. It additionally upholds the never-ending importance of artistic bravery in the face of governmental overreach and corruption. Marcos and his administration might never be mentioned by name in Manila in the claws of light, but the film persists as a damning document of an era-specific darkness by which Bra would eventually confess to feeling defeated. Among the 6 movies Bra directed between 1974 and 76, there were 3 landmark works that changed the course of his career and that of Philippine cinema. Weighed but Found Wanting 1974, Manila in the Claws of Light 1975, and In Sheng 1976. They impressed local critics, and, in the case of the last 2 films, brought the director international acclaim. The triptych was part of the outcome of Bra's attempts at rekindling his passion for film. He had begun making commercial movies in 1970 after proving his mettle in theater and television. He reaped box office success and prestigious awards for several melodramas and romances in a historical action film. 9 pictures, and 2 years into his career. However, a row with the producer and a couple of rushed, poorly made movies prompted Braha to go on a self-imposed hiatus. Upon returning 2 years after that, he vowed to create films that were more substantive and relevant to the national experience. There's too much fantasy in the movies, too much escapism, he said. Philippine films are wanting in content. They need more realism. Light popular fare had always sustained domestic filmmaking in the Philippines. But the studio system that had ruled the industry since the 30s had gone into decline by the early 60s when its staples dramas, comedies, adventures, and musicals influenced by Hollywood cinema and Spanish operetas called zaras began to lose ground to low-budget spectacles and racy exploitation films from independent producers. Bra's desire for change reflected the spirit of the times. President Ferdinand Marcos had imposed martial law in 1972 in a bid to remain in power indefinitely and amass a personal fortune, and was met by fierce resistance, including from middle-class youth inspired by anti-establishment and anti-war uprisings in the West. Marcos had always regarded cinema, an immensely popular medium in his country, as a political battleground. During his successful first run for president, a major Philippine studio released a biopic that helped him get elected by mythologizing him as a man chosen by fate to become a brilliant lawyer and politician. Campaigning for his second term, his supporters bankrolled a movie about his wartime exploits. During martial law 197,281, censors banned films, meddled with scripts, and destroyed the negatives of material they deemed offensive. Censorship hindered direct representation of the political upheaval that despotism had unleashed. It narrowed the range of films that could be released, thus encouraging the escapist movie trends that Bra abhorred: car chases, kung fu fighting, cowboys. Weighed but Found Wanting. The director's return to filmmaking follows a young man's coming of age in a community bound by superstition and prejudice. The young hero experiences first love and heartbreak, befriends outcasts, comes to comprehend the privilege his class grants him, and stands up against his sexist father. The film recalls the social criticism found in Hollywood's small-town melodramas of the 50s, as well as in Philippine prestige films. Bucking Philippine cinema's preference for star-driven movies, The director had cast an unknown 17-year-old actor, Christopher De Leon, in the lead role. Despite that, Wade but Found Wanting enjoyed box office success, proving that quality films with socially relevant themes could turn a profit. And Bra's decision to steer clear of overt political content except for two passing references to a martial law-era curfew spared his film from censorship. Bra's comeback picture impressed Mike De Leon, himself a budding filmmaker whose family owned LVN, one of 4 major Philippine studios of the post-war era. De Leon offered Bra the resources to make a film based on Sambucuco ng Luanog and the Claws of Light, a social realist novel by Edgardo Reyes that had been serialized by a mass-market literary magazine in the late 60s. De Leon acted as producer and cinematographer on the adaptation like Wade, but Found Wanting Manila centers on a young male protagonist played by a virtual unknown, in this case Rafael Bimblioco Jr., working alongside seasoned film players as well as actors from the politically progressive theater company where the director had been working since 1967. A young village fisherman named Julio Madiaga follows his girlfriend Ligaya Paraiso Hilda Carinal to Manila, where she has gone missing shortly after being recruited into domestic service. Months pass before Julio stumbles on Liga outside a church. A survivor of forced prostitution, she is now the kept woman of a Chinese business owner named Shuate, or a Czech, who still treats her like a prisoner despite the fact that she has just borne him a daughter. Julio persuades Ligaya to attempt an escape despite her warning that ACH has threatened to kill her if she tries to flee. She misses their appointed meeting time. The last act in particular, with its rousing plot turns and breathtaking images, bears out Manila's international reputation as one of the finest melodramas in Asian cinema. Manila functions both as stylized reportage on the state of the city during the Marcos era and as a universal tale of life and death in a metropolis. The story Braha is actually telling through his urban fable of star-crossed lovers is a socio-political one about the plight of Manila's expendable working class. Julio's quest cuts a path through the various contemporary guises of slavery and the dire conditions in Manila's fells, among other pressing indications of social inequity. The film's most moving sequences involve the exploitation and alienation of labor under capitalism. To stay in the city as he searches for Ligaya, Julio takes a job as a menial laborer at construction sites. He also turns to sex work in a moment of desperation. Bra details Julio's exploitation in both trades. The foreman at one site pockets more than a third of Julio's wages, leaving him with barely enough to buy food, much less to secure shelter, and the conditions at the sites are hazardous, with no hard hats or safety harnesses for the workers. Julio's stint at the male brothel is far more lucrative than the construction work, but his clients' demands distress him. His only respite from the alienation is the camaraderie of his fellow workers. He discovers that he can count on his friends to share their meager provisions when he has nothing to eat, to open their homes to him, to loan him money. Julio learns a valuable lesson about hope from the solidarity of workers and the lower classes. Manila's penetrating depictions of ponage and sex work draw from the experiences of the novel's author. Edgardo Reyes spent years working at construction sites and serving as a gopher for a Chinatown brothel. The film also benefits from Reyes's lucid account of the hierarchies that operate within developing nations' rapacious economies. At the bottom of the heap, even lower than wage laborers like Julio, are the subalterns, the beggars, as well as the victims of human trafficking. Above Julio are middle-class folks who exploit the underclass with impunity. They include the foreman Balagidia and Mrs. Cruz, the woman who lured Ligaya to the city and sold her to a brothel. Small-time capitalists such as Och and the gay brothel owner Caesar occupy a higher social station than the petty bourgeois. The oligarchs, too high up to be visible to the underclass, fittingly appear in the film only by proxy. Throughout, images of neon lights and commercial signage suggest the culpability of such bureaucrats and global capitalists for the hard-scrabble existence of Manila's underclass. A sign at the construction site where Julio works bears the name La Madrid, invoking the capital of the first Western nation to turn Filipinos into vassals. When Julio enters the flesh trade, neon signs for Japanese electronics firms can be seen burning in the night sky. As with many films set in major cities, in Manila, in the Claws of Light, the Philippine capital is more than a visually appealing or symbolic backdrop. The metropolis is itself the subject of various narratives embedded within Bra's film, including a portrayal of its social geography. Manila opens with black and white footage of the city's Chinese Quarter stirring to life. At the crossing of the district's most iconic thoroughfares, Julio spends hours observing Ah Tek's home for signs of Liga. He soon realizes that Chinatown, apart from being a business haven, is also a cesspool of prostitution. The film's unflattering portrayal of the ethnic enclave, and especially its dwellers, triggered charges of anti-Chinese racism from reviewers and the Chinese Filipino community. While Manila highlights well-known facts about the district, its stereotypical characterization of Ah Tek and his fellow Chinese people remains a problematic element of the film. Besides Chinatown, Manila explores the heaving slums of the tanned foreshore area, showing the housing shortage among the urban poor and the hellish living conditions of the underclass. Midway through the film, Julio is kicked off a construction site, and his fellow Ah Tek takes him in. Ah Tek and his family live in a squatter's area along a polluted canal called Sunagapag, a name that means burnt lime. Later in the film, a fire reduces the settlement to smoldering debris. In a controversial episode, the film also tracks Manila's gay haunts. Bra asked screenwriter Clolo Del Mundo Jr. to create the subplot not found in Rhea's novel depicting Julio's recourse to prostitution. The brothel scene was filmed at a gay massage parlor on the edge of Chinatown and featured real-life pimps and male sex workers in bit roles. Concerns about the running time led producers to film. The brothel scene was filmed at a gay massage parlor on the edge of Chinatown and featured real-life pimps and male sex workers in bit roles. Concerns about the running time led producers to abbreviate this episode before the film's international release. In Manila's original theatrical version, the sequence included a scene at a gay bar, some cruising and hustling inside a movie theater, and glimpses of a deepening friendship between Julio and Bobby, the guy who persuades him to try sex work. Bobby becomes infatuated with Julio, and in a moment of tenderness, steals a kiss from him. Julio punches Bobby and, driven by homophobia, ends his stint at the brothel. Had this last scene been retained, it might have established more clearly why Julio quits the lucrative sex work and settles for starvation wages as a peon. The excised scenes with their rare visual documentation of the gay demand were never restored to the film. Braha embeds in his film about Manila the political upheavals of the Philippines in the 70s with shots of posters and placards bearing slogans like "Long live the workers" and "Down with imperialism and fascism," referring to American support of the Marcos dictatorship, or an image of a raised fist, and the initials of the radical organization Kabatang Makabayan Nationalist Youth, mindful of the dictatorships. Paranoia about subversive content in movies downplayed the film's images of social unrest as mere background that served to set the plot in the period before the dictatorship, not in the martial law era itself. This disclaimer falters in light of the fact that although Marcos had outlawed protests, they had only grown more fervent in response to his attempts to forge the so-called new society. The political slogans and grim social conditions Braha attributes to the year 1970 still prevailed when the film opened in 1975 under martial law. Marcos had promised to use his powers to uplift the poorest of the working people, but the Filipino underclass only became poorer and more restive during his tenure. Fortunately, for whatever reason, Braha's images of crippling poverty and political resistance did not bother the censors, who approved the film without cuts. The brilliance of Manila in the Claws of Light lies partly in its multiple tensions. First, gritty realism occurs alongside poised stylization. De Leon's artful cinematography unfolds in jarring contrast to the city's ugliest sights. His panoramic shots and deep space compositions emphasize the breadth, congestion, and horrid majesty of sprawling shanty towns. Tension also suffuses the sound design, in which two kinds of soundscape overlap: chatter and urban den on the one hand, and on the other a musical score steeped in fantasy and emotion. And there is a tension within Julio's point of view between exteriority and inwardness. Because Julio is deliriously hungry, exhausted, terrified, and hopeful. The harshness and beauty of Manila as he sees it clash and blend in unpredictable ways, suspending itself between social expose and parable. Manila functions both as stylized reportage on the state of the city during the Marcos era and as a universal tale of life and death in a metropolis. It juxtaposes naturalistic depictions of proletarian life with moments of dreamy lyricism. For example, Julio's recollections of Lea in their lost paradise, a seaside village bathed in golden sunshine. The principal characters even have allegorical names. Julio Madiaga translates as Julius Patience. Ligaya Paraiso means joyful paradise, and Ik sounds like Ah Tek, Filipino slang for money. The film's plot, despite its meandering exposition and confusing flashbacks, holds together elegant patterns. Julio's descent into Manila's proletarian inferno, for instance, proceeds in 3 passages, in each of which he is guided by a male friend, Ah Tek at the construction site, Bobby in the red light district, and Paul in Chinatown. Visual and sound motifs ripple throughout the narrative. Western pop songs portend death in various scenes. In contrast, the movie elaborates its titular metaphor, fatal brightness, solely through visual motifs, as when the glare in a funeral parlor emphasizes the power of the dead, or when the neon lights of Rizal Avenue, Manila's historic entertainment district, conjure the dream of social mobility, but also point the way to ruin. Manila reaped numerous awards and fared well at the box office during its 2 domestic theatrical engagements. It enjoyed a commercial run in France and television broadcast in the United Kingdom. Before Bra entered the scene, it was rare for Philippine art house pictures to be shown in Europe. Cinephiles in the West tend to favor the melodrama in Shang over Manila. The former is perhaps more totally structured and more picturesque than the latter. But in Bra's film-obsessed country, Manila in the Claws of Light is widely regarded as his magnum opus. Many films about people moving from the country to the big city detail the loss of innocence as the dream of a shining land of opportunity yields to a grim reality. Julio Madiaga Rafael Ro Jr. arrives in Manila with no such delusions. His eyes are already wide open to potential horror as he has come to search for his girlfriend Leah Hilda Carinal, who he suspects has been lured into a sex trafficking ring. Already expecting to find a nightmare, what Julio discovers in Manila turns out to be even worse in Manila. In The Claws of Light 1975, director Lino Brocka, adapting along with screenwriter Cielo Del Mundo Jr., a novel by Edgardo Reyes, depicts the capital city of the Philippines as a broken society designed to exploit and ultimately destroy the working class. Julio risks life and limb working in construction for 2.5 pesos a day, with his supervisor scheming almost half his wages in the process. Julio's eventual turn to the sex trade himself is entirely understandable, though it brings him just as much misery. In a country ruled by the iron-fisted martial law of dictator and kleptocrat Ferdinand Marcos, there is nowhere to turn for justice. Certainly not to a corrupt police force. Constantly seeking his lost Leah, Julio at least finds some sympathy from his co-workers who Bra depicts as generous and decent, if perhaps a bit misguided. One dreamer argues the merits of the big city over the country, observing that life might be tough here, but at least you have a chance to win the jackpot. Maybe, just maybe, someday. In a sense, Julio agrees, though the only prize he cares about is Liga, and he will suffer any indignity as long as the chance to find and rescue her remains alive. Braha had begun his filmmaking career directing more commercially oriented soap operas, but after a brief self-imposed hiatus, he returned to cinema with the goal of making more socially engaged work. Manila was not his first success on this front, but it provided an international breakout that established Braha as one of the preeminent voices of Filipino cinema. Today, the film is generally regarded as his masterpiece and perhaps even the greatest Filipino film of its time. Though, it's fair to say that the majority of Western critics making such an assessment haven't seen enough Filipino cinema to really know. Like most of Bra's films, the low-budget Manila is usually described with terms such as realism and naturalism, which are both apt, but the film indulges in plenty of impressionistic touches, including the numerous flashbacks to Julio's nostalgia-tinged remembrances of more innocent times back home with Liga. The film's exquisitely rendered nighttime sequences in Manila also offer a striking visual and tonal contrast to the daytime shots, though the city is equally menacing at all times. Rocco was an amateur actor who Bra found in a rehab center, at least according to the documentary included on this disc, and his quiet, unassuming performance renders Julio a palpable and sympathetic figure, making it all the more painful to watch his grueling trudge along his own viatilar ROA. Viewers will figure out early that the film isn't blazing a trail to a happy place, but the ending is still startling and unforgettable. Video. The film is presented in its original 1.85:1 aspect ratio. This restoration is another product of the World Cinema Project headlined by Martin Scorsese from the Criterion booklet. This work was restored in 2013 by the Film Development Council of the Philippines and the Sinica di Bologna/Limagen Retrovita Laboratory in association with the Film Foundation's World Cinema Project LVN Cinema Artists Philippines and cinematographer Mike De Leon. This restoration was funded by Doha Film Institute supervised by De Leon. This digital transfer was created in 4K resolution from the 35mm original camera negative. Because of color decay in the negative, De Leon guided the grading phase and validated the color using a positive print as a reference. The decayed state of the negative presented numerous challenges to restorers, but the strong final product is a testament to their hard labor. A few shots, especially in the beginning, look a bit soft and lacking in detail, but this is only an occasional problem. Colors are bright, though not gaudy, and it appears that restorers resisted the urge to overcorrect any degraded elements. You see a few scratches and other signs of damage, but it all has an authentic, naturalistic look. Audio. The linear PCM mono track isn't the most robust you've ever heard, and some of the dialogue and music sounds a bit thin or tiny at times, but it's not a problem. Optional English subtitles support the Tagalog dialogue extras. Since this restoration is associated with the World Cinema Project, Martin Scorsese provides a brief intro 2 minutes about the film in Manila. A Filipino Film is a 1975 documentary 23 minutes by filmmaker Mike De Leon, the cinematographer on Manila. This consists of some on-set footage as well as interview with Bra and the cast. Signed, Lo Bra is a 1987 documentary 83 minutes by Christian Blackwood, which consists mostly of Bra either at work or just talking to the director about his career. He's an electric personality, and it's a thrill to get to hear so much from him, especially considering Bra would die in a car accident just 4 years later. In Challenging the Viewer, 19 minutes, critic and filmmaker Tony Raines discusses Bra's early career. I had no idea he was a Mormon, and then delves into the Manila adaptation in some detail. The slim fold-out booklet includes an essay by film scholar Jose B. Capano. Final thoughts. This is the second Braha film released by Criterion in the past few years after Inang 1976 was included as part of the Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project 2 box set last year. It's great to see Bra's signature film receive a standalone release with ample extras to support the film. I hope many more Filipino films will join the collection in the near future. Perfumed Nightmare could sure use the deluxe treatment. Before a modern art house renaissance of Filipino cinema, thanks to the international acclaim of directors like Lav Diaz and Barranti Mendoza, who have dominated the likes of Cannes, Venice, and Berlin over the past decade, Lo Bra was the progenitor of Filipino cinema thanks to a trio of titles he unleashed in the mid-1970s. His 1976 title In Siang, which was recently restored courtesy of the Criterion Collection in their World Cinema Project Volume 2 box set, was the first film from the Philippines to premiere at Cannes in the director's fortnight. Bra would eventually compete twice in the main competition, beginning with 1979's Jaguar, melding elements of social realism with sometimes tawdry melodramatic tropes, which marked the output of his early prolific output. His 1975 classic Manila in the Claws of Light, adapted from a novel by Edgardo Reyes, has all the elements of a sordid film noir turned into the foreboding fatality of Greek tragedy. Young and naive village fisherman Julio Madiaga Rafael Bimble Rocco Jr. has left behind the desolate provinces in which he grew up to search for his love Liga Hilda Coronel in Manila. Opening in the black and white slums of the Chinese district, Julio has spent all the money he saved in the past year in a search for Leah. At one time, she wrote letters from a mysterious address he scopes out at night in hopes of seeing either her, the sinister woman who recruited her from the village under the ruse of work in a more lucrative domestic service. Forced to work in the backbreaking and dangerous construction agency, Julio eventually becomes a gay-for-pay ex-worker after a kindly interaction with a friendly gigolo who proves even men can use their bodies to attain a room of one's own. Eventually, Julio's luck takes a turn for the better, and he stumbles upon Liga outside of a church. But the man who now owns her is willing to go to extreme lengths to keep her. Bra's portrait of Manila's underbelly hinges on the inevitable poverty, which defines the reality for many of its denizens, living hand-to-mouth as one character describes it. The film was made under the dictatorship of President Ferdinand Marcos, who has imposed martial law in 1972. Julio is preoccupied with his mission of finding Liga, and so seems to view the circumstances of his fellow colleagues, both construction and sex workers, as temporary predicaments which don't define him. In short, Julio isn't quite an active participant in the urban degradation he's experiencing. Manila isn't all bad after all. Maybe if you had money, a coworker explains, then the metropolis is certainly palatable. While Julio doesn't have money, he has the desire to locate Ligaya and run away with her, even if it's back to the hopelessness of the provincial life, which is depicted as another all-consuming trap people are desperate to escape. Playing like a riff on Orpheus and Eurydice, Bra's film plays similarly to items like Paul Schrader's seminal hardcore 1979 or Shahi Mamuro's eerie 1967 documentary A Man Vanishes, in which the director follows a man's desolate fiancée as she tries to locate the man she loves who disappeared 2 years prior. Like the revenge drama in Siang starring Hilda Coronel, which would premiere a year later. Manila in the Claws of Night descends into genre pulp territory. What's perhaps most astonishing is Bra's candid portrayal of a gay Filipino brothel where poverty has led some heterosexual men to higher wages than many other opportunities in the city. On the other hand, the friendly gentleman who takes Julio under his sex worker wing reveals some choice home decor, which would suggest he's lying about his heterosexuality, like a prominently displayed poster of Elizabeth Taylor in The Taming of the Shrew. Religion is also something Bra doubles down on curiously. When Julio finally tracks down Liga, it's outside of a church. However, as she relates her tale of woe, they pointedly leave consecrated ground to a place they can more easily converse, which happens to be inside a movie theater playing Nicholas Ray's King of Kings, 1961, a cinematic depiction of Jesus Christ. Much like in Shang, the experiences the protagonist faces in Manila warps him beyond recognition, and Bra tosses his once innocent hero into the bleak clutches of considerable violence. Criterion presents this new 4K digital restoration in 1.85:1 with uncompressed monaural soundtrack. Picture and sound quality are superb in this transfer, which features some expressive cinematography from DP Mike DeLeon, who supervised the restoration. Martin Scorsese introduces the title, and Criterion includes several bonus features. Director Martin Scorsese provides this 2-minute introduction comparing Bra to Fassbinder as far as representing a period of his country's cinema. Cinematographer Mike DeLeon made this 22-minute documentary in 1975 about the making of Manila in the Claws of Light, which features interviews with Lo Bra and actors Hilda Coronel and Raphael Rowe. Director Christian Blackwood profiled Lo Bra in this 83-minute 1987 documentary. Filmmaker and festival programmer Tony Raines discusses Lo Bra in the social context of Manila in the Claws of Light in this 19-minute program recorded by the Criterion Collection. A significant pillar of Filipino cinema, at last recuperated. Bra's Manila in the Claws of Light is a profoundly sympathetic melodrama cloaked in gritty neo-realism. Lo Bra's seminal 1975 masterpiece Manila in the Claws of Light offers a realistic look on the titular city, while also providing a universal story on life and death in the metropolis. The film centers on Julio, played by Raphael Bimbleru Jr., a young fisherman from the country who ventures into Manila in search of his sweetheart Leah, played by Hilda Coronel. She had been lured into prostitution disguised as the promise of a better life and education in the city. And now Julio is determined to bring her out of Manila and the hellhole it represents. But first, Julio has to work through a grossly underpaid job as a construction worker if he is to financially make it in the city, and his brief travails into gay prostitution do not help matters. Based on the novel of the same name from Edgardo Reyes, Manila in the Claws of Light owes its distinct brand of cinema verite to Italy's post-war realist cinema of Dicca's contemporaries. Cinematographer Mike DeLeon, who also produced the film, emphasizes the hustle and bustle of the city with several panoramic shots and deep focus compositions that do not bother to look away from the scrappiness of the streets as well as the people in it. A diversion from the concrete mess of Manila are the quick flashback scenes from the province where Julio and Leah used to live, evoking a sense of nostalgia with its diverse color palette that evokes the beauty of nature. Additionally, the tension of the city is also accompanied by the equally restless soundtrack of city chatter and melodramatic strains. However, where Dicca ends Bicycle Thieves on a hopeful note, Bra's film does not. It plays like a scene out of Dandy's Inferno. Only this time, the ever-imposing metropolis that is Manila pays no heed to the struggles of its otherwise hopeful occupants and sends them to their fiery despair. Julio gradually finds himself disillusioned in his quest for Leah, and by the film's final frames has his glimmer of hope erased by a newfound bitterness. But it's not always doom and gloom in Bra's world. In Julio's construction gig, he finds solidarity in fellow workers who treat him as an equal and share their frustrations with their unfair boss who pockets about a third of their salary every payday. One of them, Ah Tek, takes Julio into his simple home in the cramped and dirty slums of the city. This sense of brotherhood comes out of the burdening weight of social inequality caused by capitalism, with Braha providing a social commentary in the context of the Philippines being in a state of instability since President Ferdinand Marcos had declared martial law 3 years prior. The indelible image of Julio standing by the signpost at the corner of Enan and Misericordia streets where he tracks down Liga to the Bandando district is one of several symbols in a film rife with such symbolisms. Ongan refers to Roman Ongan, a longtime resistance fighter from Philippine history, while Misericordia means pity. Julio finds himself in this intersection of pity and revolt several times throughout the film, signifying his limbo on what to do when he eventually reconnects with Leah. Will he take pity on himself and his lover? Or will he resort to rebellion to break free of the suffocating cycle that Manila represents? Manila, in the Claws of Light. However, there have been whispers of Chinese racism in the film. From the unflattering depiction of the city's Chinatown as a hotbed of prostitution to the character of Ah Tek, played by Tommy Yap, who has a role in Liga's descent into the sex trade. Another point of contention is the subplot of Julio's foray into gay prostitution, not in the novel, but which Braha added to Cielo del Mundo's script. While deemed unnecessary by some, it can be argued that it is a clever and indispensable way to place Julio through the ordeal that his lover Leah had to go through in the same trade. Owing to its title, the film explores the fatality of being drawn to the light. Julio searches for Leah, the joy and the light of his life, but finds himself ruined in the process. He ventures into the city, the light that supposedly brings financial stability, and faces disillusionment instead. The film's last act hammers home this realization, making Manila in the Claws of Light Bra's magnum opus in Philippine cinema and cementing its reputation as one of the greatest films in the world. The use of repeated flashbacks fits seamlessly into the film's narrative. When the rural beauty of the island is juxtaposed with the decaying life in the city, viewers are left more shocked. While the movie can be seen as a reflection of resilience during its release period, it now serves as a medium that marks history. By blending brave social commentary with a visually rich cinematic experience, Manila in the Claws of Light remains one of the greatest Philippine movies ever. Italic shots from the film Manila in the Claws of Light source film screenshot Manila in the Claws of Light. The film's visual language creates a realistic feel, portraying the city as a character that appears rich and happy on the surface, but is depressed in its inner layers. Cinematographer Mike DeLeon employs a documentary style, which is essential in creating this sense of realism. The blend of natural lighting with long takes and static shots allows viewers to gradually immerse themselves in the film as if they are living in it. Italic shots from the film Manila in the Claws of Light source. Film screenshot Manila in the Claws of Light. The movie serves as a reflection of the harsh realities of metropolitan life, uncovering the struggles of the people beneath the tall buildings and busy streets. Whether it's the wage disparity for the same work or the individuals forced into prostitution, it reveals the gritty truths of their existence. Rather than offering solutions, the film acts as a medium to present these terrible realities to the viewers. Italic shots from the film Manila in the claws of light source. Film screenshot Manila in the claws of light. The movie begins with black and white visuals that gradually transition into color with the introduction of the protagonist. It's not just a simple shift from one shot to another. Instead, the same visual transforms into color. This cinematic technique is truly fascinating, especially for that period. Julio seems captivated by the towering buildings and bustling crowds, suggesting that he is new to the environment. Filmmaker Lino Brocka masterfully engages the audience in a short amount of time, creating the impression of a compelling film from the very first visuals. Italic, the transition from black and white visuals to color source film screenshot Manila in the claws of light. The movie follows Julio, a young fisherman from the island of Marinduque, who arrives in Manila during the 1970s. As the protagonist begins working as a poorly paid construction worker, viewers come to understand more about his life and how he arrived in the city. Through Julio's life in the city, the film explores the exploitation of the working class and the struggles of laborers. Italic filmmaker Loa, source IMDb. The 1975 film Manila in the Claws of Light has been described by many critics and cinephiles as one of the greatest Philippine movies ever. Directed by Lino Brocka, the movie is based on Edgardo M. Reyes's novel In the Claws of Brightness. This neon noir drama
safe now for so I look for puzzle with those net emotion. Family beslots Madira. My hair helps us get message net. Her did a book as it oil that's doing. And I hit up with this and just that circle of a bomb. Had the tail that ich mir miss bats net. Snarf neither in Stacy, snarf nick. It'll have been more soil. Share and her husband was in the surf with the street. She the Wolgart summer for this loser by him in the sky. That's that was all. It looks like it, yes, and it's rich and lighting off for her street. Yeah, I'll add it, kind of the looks more open off. Fix her the self meeting with that very roast life. I'll Merva. I can never miss happy paper, the word I could speak so snail, but I thought bit. Said the opposite. It looks like it feel on a shelves the Sydney. Yes, I get her 99 naps, it's a hazard almost the rugil silk so it's on some further off. He be a bit of huggy lads near a loyal. The shake is not her falling, and Mr. Harpus did not be more. Sailing and a be more, am still, surfs the sim that did I ish. Her alarm feeling like do I get her not near when the she's to talk about it our wheel shot so we should my head silk cities. I'll now fiddle be ailing off so I'll hurt fat. Matt Mr. Felix 9 off I'll had fun in so off, wheel and stroke. I'm sucking now wheel or fat girl when else it's in it nicks it up. See your gale is calorie. Magnificent roasted salas and a shoot to sarp but nemesis nivnick. The old block, but a bob steamy. Flas me her opposite will be not sit net. Baj and skirts nicks in a far ale so ilu. A woman or ill. I am that oil, send a gaster, but I'm life and the swim that's her fuss to search her. Sned a scan of skirts nicking it. That suit me off field, sned a scatter paddle like seen it. Sas off nish name it we've been girl or net surf. Sned a scan of skirts nicking it like it. Her stief in there and it's the hay bits of shoe. While for girl and skirts in the quill at me net. Flasser her opposite her open in a sheet to surf, but no I get her his ock. And get on the willer, give you net. Her off and you like. And I had never been serious since Viller the off seller. Bernet eller, broda her bin it. As if not like so net. And me are forget a perfect real from our so yes. Snashednik see the air strip gets silly with the way I shan't net. I'll end him as the shednik such not net or if not in us as a good my foot. Peter net for sleep. And her butt sit here for crazy if I was so low. It is in the special however not no sure see the line of circle but gal with search correct. My fifth of me fifth lordness was the air which search correct that's it. All for what was even without that earth caps do I'll end him surf the symptoms never but feel. I get her for cots holler the high in that oil. Sass off next name it we've been girl earth net surf. Soren am vo her minams net. Heel schnein af mir op bis nickel net. En she's de sarf blame. I boy looks as nicht du heel block. Me bab. Alright, but me get lurky says I was all net. Tonight of Knox is that's very son. I can never remember from nerve so you look off with off teller. Brett's sister and her sister yes. Holler. Oh, and him doesn't the shit Nick lab a mess looks net way looks never for her grown skirts in the quill up. Yes. Oh, and him paid a liar sure hot don't get book for sale no earth the wall. Interesting all old beef queen steamy. Mac knew a little mere skin in her net or grown skirts in the kazang girl wheel shin. Allen en business shit niks sure han it versus the slogart so oil. I get lurks sit out small. Why nicht Philip seen yash does that no so. Heel ngeit does eat sim. Cash the van get being making it if no care for the sim ngeit sir I get van she will not if and that zur the sim business net no if that was nearly little see. Allen in the master homes nap so you that her voa. Na shake is that but sim off but they're not zur the sim. Me and him away back but near him business off when they're filling him start so again. On our little happy was our buying their forks if a stress in the Ellen and beat us to the right seas at work where we'll make happy by the mail, but special huts there in that our will lab the garden life from our 20 Philippine investigation as it was off in the Ellen. The shank carbonate serfs and members this verse is the was off in the Ellen and our weird gap. That it's a nail of netched out very line. Heel sure hoist my fifth dash video business. Snare skin you very net that but the nagam life fifth dash it as it. Suppose there was that. Yeah, dear for be some we see room no one is odd no up when they do him life need will feel more in if not it's a hit. Heel shit. Hammer vat and life funny Philip city gets that this nix in it. So if you're a heel but our things they sit cause show out. Or if you're said the flag is in lips and not dress here must it down where voa. I should mervo no then it ill much wasn't that up. Beating it must say, drop in your life for than is that falling it out that's it. And life is national little day, yeah. Silver floss them life the fun. Her keeps it was keeps it with it that's your scam. Says he opened the $3 off and keeps his own narcot bro is in the street deal soon. Sir Gerkin if you skull out the nights or nightly from McCondid. South Grano any Philip Nigon among you a big missile and the elves off in the Ellen and Strauss or Fiano. Da ham wie little. Is die snich guy but I shall now at the way making it your vet up. I make them life it's doing it me asked and your soups because that's at our will snumma here this nick funnel but our is the her wah nor that bit power from south gra has it such. It is not cat for even a girl but not burning it ebony off it's a age dark stood. The elf was off in it. All in them barks it outside with the book. Oh, Lord, not net. Snell out rooms that is a earning edit or rung his ups because of our will. He let it up. Other time I hit in the battle where you'll prevent it. Safe now for it, if it not was will cannot shin if you was at our own law, age dark than you know. Man, it gets her breaking it, fish here, and mums in opposite alley rail, net more off self, then it gets her net. Wow, all what doesn't it send it, wedding it not, some of the was up. I shall now for the do it, and get the net, and there only him lips it, loving it must that. Her kiss never rearing it, and the old mouths and ivy, and it her great finished to the wheel shops. I thought they made her slowly and that's just the witness covered in this room with your fat fair own net or own my soaking what the demon of grass and as it is Nazar probably apes it. Floss me hoy look in the spar, but it is a cent as often not either. The axes as her suit. And I stir her when the scarts in the quill left them, but not bullets sick fish in her flight. Shamos on sick calm names lift. Over a brown ball small wood game sit gilps, Nemo moms, not the back of vendor, Lush nacht of six circular, heel give us, circular, gets a elu, schneen, or soft off gimmie. Race girl and Nick has surf near the soccer shall feeler the lifted at scap shelf, so you can get with your city more. Slow shiver of our bean at the life and a gay mile, yellow and either for full blue sit at the and off the even yak of the face, and has name but serious soon skimmed person, and the sharp scavated business air works as if he heard it out of the stumps that go where we'll make netting all wolf, and one big light visit it. Perhaps it was named cotton all or what whisper for an ailishness as it only is power and it skiff harsh doesn't show me the alish got nicky wrist spot stuff, but no, but dark said no what gels in these smurfing your sort, the elf was off in the ellen. Messen we snicked up, it is the English door, Romero, a guy, the airs in must fat, and as their purpose in a fought, and serve my ones, the air, which send in a sheen of these knit. The elf was off, with what I shin at the minute chucks, if there's nights as ulks in it, saves and I stuff dear fats and air. Mrs. Elbow, Miss Nook Elf, along it, I brought in a heap drops in the office, thirps of an ice, never been from Maxino, and they'd not in a eye, or carries and finish, custard in on it. She decided to make her up, the hate a city to rock. Snarsenis massagis, self-safe Mr. Safe Nilden the thoughts, there's the sarpser where the work and on my horse do we smith. Says I did it not in him, the must ever be the sit. If her the sagging money, her Faraday or shin I fish. Lord back at the stove and I work, but Nimma wolf, her patch nerve, it's that bread. Mash and off the snow with never floor, get a hag item. Mere fitness is shelf, say other if sah, but my fear man. Her hearse is near running a what. My father would know when it was. The sheriff's had it ox, it say as if I is near Belford. The elf mile on the safe, the guy mile. And be ill. Here's the Verno Peter. I'm out with Catfinet, Snammy Cuddle was sound up. Life the loss is it, the elf was off, and the L and him's our bull. Mass law was life, neath the lip city, within a wee bit, the elf was off, and the L and him doesn't get out when he roots a sit net. Here's the neath the lip, is low, net sits, has neath the air, which is the where the with the head and your fuss in it. Mass that'll be Mr. Fluff, your sit over Ernie Amber's neath lift sit. Sweet Benet, and the shoes to soft fatal ire crowd to the barge of a self no scat and ape doing it me to sit me with circling our fatal ire as in the here finish get the dark snap a roll mazery snap of the layer struck but same nor in the air that she cut for that seal and surf nor earth and or stand leaf sir cricket. And I'm rid of what ailer is the sun not a broken as Alan chasing the slide. Skip off beat net series, scarcely it'll be so even. Even said the thoughtful shinam, I've been armed of BBC by heel snap me out. And as you think me, and the shell is out there in the amber wolf, and you wish. Here we'd not say you gas if no shizard as if the stall with okay what. Search them if it is me up. Smeared like the devil for like netting it as scabbed in iris. Faj need lots in my far ailing neighbors pack off when it's a royal. Search them if it is spot. Graf meals up net. Ja, men het beeld zijn sarfbetzeil, ne. Zerd as if the immer bullshit is like no mustache, the bullshit is not ailing is sarfbetzeil, such as niece, and no shirt at the air, and this her scotch bot as if I ail me scale you hear it. Her all in him isn't shit, Nick, such no, I how I should my for the sarf, Nick, for the sweets and my in this bubble out of gaps, how looking faster than that. Sneezy thing is near it, skizzy oil, that's in the show, meat side eater on a song as he think it will help such. Narrows are correctly the page to the shitter on it, salary you saw, so that schnetter like it. Millie friend the show made suit, did neither one who and it will search correct, get a long a thing it will help such. Says night smicker snats in the show, miser correct, gets all Mississippi, forgotten him in a singing it, so let's go salt him with it. Caps hat looking cast in it. Search hammer at big social baby, stain on one shitty and her on a go. So let's make the opposite fun at such nerves, search hammer, they're not used to talk, but. Life and the noise, lucky little ye was on get erva. I'm even at I'm thought from making in her idea was that verse in the shoes to talk. Me asked if they'd have off derps the wood as I get meal and shit. I'm out going to see some you labor from that. Oh, we'll shrum with cat feed the street deal swim. Sure, not feller sweet, but it's a six or win. Sneak the in the side, saying of us in your diddy or simmer when I'm a waiter or dim at that cat for the keeps the sid. Life's in this name of berry was lots it and the shoes to talk for me. Magnificent of a derpside, and the shoes to sarp the actually alone not oil. Sass off next day, we've been girl earth net sarp. Slats seller, we're must find it on up. Slats with the opposite finding in her. Sir dogs and make it net so I can work me him. Said was I get. He'd a little bit slush nine off the back on who's be fit. He'd in the vow with the dross it, that's it, and on sit up where vow. My nerves in the vat sermon, if I guess your spell and the mission air gams is never more full beef sermon. And that cat. Life sitting at us in the swish, so I'll end them feed us sit down as he was it. Well, shit. So I need to believe me for a hammer fair when I get dealer if not, and if Sandy Pachna, self video sits at the brush navy in life, and it's a ambulance drove from her, and that's the other if it was just scales nerfed me and so are pile. Sahoil, that's the air, no any belief ninger even surface it. I got it on Mr. Lemus, not a guy I mean, sal soil. All my skin over us means are correct. I thought other than Mozilla Miss Vistals, I was on my foot. My foot when a scarrets are not got me, and it I am stuck, says it's such in it, says in this net, says even a week so like, though there is in your tie, but it's in as those neat belief. Down the change got finite, so all will shrum no math, and your bath in a vesnian, not sealers on that, saying a vesnian, and it all shall lift it. So we boom sit that alright, either streets snow from a beam lift without an escape, but sit. Hörde sig not never sing get your flag gil when we surf say I look na earth time the sweeper help like say agil. Hörde I'm get surf but in it that's air drop my in that earth not say the liar. Screw we the liar what on start up. Where's no fan get your fire that gets fixed, na agil now for baby style, her fears is need all it. Specify the cast getting you is knit so skim lifts it. Now the laws are so glad, na, the macro a day when outfit. Says near National Barps are not getting a gaster buffet, save him some nit. Stem get there, na, garage, then I'm lifting it. Thad little bush deal the miser. Ik neem vuller fat, while ballen on dat er heel schaps. Dat jouwks de aisle zullen overgedle. Jelle darben het zurg, ze simjes los aan, gel. Ede de bitser dat we skaat stem gino. Snijn even af vert caps, het is net no one the vie. Obe wie loopt zit wie en een esch ne warp zurg waarom met. Nee, de laatste heel maar over de jaar is nimmer over. Zo onder de arf ben Law of its her own skulls that sark nach Mozilla Amstas. St. Grotson on them with this foster gimlet thither up and not little through net or Mozilla Amlights. So great gets in the sparkle on smith that so at Ashens mulch do we imagine herself what to the night. Snell vellums the alpha of my girl and is at ass in a hyper elves in the share of broken bull was now 9. Vajan scarts in the Zuler fat and Ada Sinzer no while no. Snevar but we lord sah but the so but the al and the map is nazar per meow never in from match it's me stone a shader gets necking in or warm must it rush game pillover smooth snamo the flash so you scap shelf near field it yeah either sit sadder apple for you killing it must still snare scap the man off sale hard as that we ski fad dealing off neck girls got so nice sweet with the emser as it snare forks in office no wheel missile Veel skasserim zit na, veel schneien af, I my flush never broke purple hats a show wiggle. Sponsors that. Large knitted in his hats in that, Nish Barks is Hobbits negative eyes keeps nest. Na her mocking that, her dear is trophy up, shark keeps in lot of shall in that. Schnam wished smacky billet and the shark brother not we but the net, sark baby says get. Her I'm other feet, yes, sir, girl, Earl, says her mere fuss fine ill sits at a yes, so you look Nicholas Decker van no. If it I thought that I'm out mouth gets silly reader in the over, but our own elves off in the island of skin, murder the lavish the old beer snacking. Scan of the it's no more from the shiz next to him, said I do. Her that gets so for oil of his cups hat see that. Here's some of Mississippi Bachano, slow night and I immediately making it. Sobs the abla, there was a day was in a little feelsy. So many arms and there's lushed the elf niece in the circle of Fast here if was at air strips the oil. Miss that. The shaker be rogi lorries safe net high yielded or muhnai minulach get lab. A laughter surf see letting eggs here not spear kilo stay out now muzzle back. Make a fast discuss spark eater. It is finished by work that's the eyes yeah. Sef me gish net the and yowsing on it as it whips them boomer make it and your faps out great. Life without syrup certainly er oil me get your what's nil out and that's if it's no amorphous. I land if it's this. Seer moet ook de appel van nummer 5 meer zit het pas doen. Er nu is de nummer door naar waar je op zit. Zelfs niet zacht was het zit. Fat allee de charme is het zit. Zeef nikkers richting meer zo voor pas wel gezien is ook stel was af genellen. Heel aan en oil er nog net maar op veel kwam moes merva. Weef niet van uit zit. Fat is misbaats net. Maar skus de zo wel. Scherm is er wordt fat net al niet veel net. Nile birth but I know if you know. Gosh, double exertion this more nerdy law, but no up sarksy. The shake will be no way this power just like figure up. Fat many not more her the dress now from the gas do step their ass slashed seal, though not more her the sky bakes in an elf wished it. The skidney from sofa, earth the emsits and the scissorina. Here feels cast in the law, see between more cabin omness. It is in the nickel wabber which makes the while gets organized, but as if not going to believe it's all varshu. Her gefart casses it zurks him that's over I'll net or that get feels it. Stretched that I'll serve accidentally out fail. Feel silly carum ned. Neville would I get in the shoes to sark bestiller from the hours net. Her from the feet earth off and you know. No, I get the saw her as nerve breath. Do I reply after I look net oh no up. I'm sensitive I so dear directly my for what I've been zuler padded no. Her thought seller, brother, get no look well say persisting at soft power get the shaker's lot on earth fatter or mzuich I now 15 more. Yes, did her curve to get. Says I read in your pucker where than no. Barge savior, but I meet nerf. Off those kind of gary. The hours ago block as a math surface there file 80 minutes there, murphy off by those net it. Reich gamer van zich roch, but I nach in the snatch dirt pat lads feels there's a game siach nu smash dale was say real. It allows gas him off this and it's a leather van nu heel block fall a wheel fiddler. Must ne? Ja. Sir Garrick is there's ne eilish nacht of small fiffen of it say. Sorry Bob was net sissy though. I'll in invading him gave nager not in it reached the soft blame was at net sphere was an of it oil. The ass in the skirts and the far ill gave it fat. Her thunder fat, snap me off, but sitting a shark nose it. It is in the slaver, so I eat him so off my foot of terror. Says him up and I give, and I seen it earth me do. The ass thought an earth snipsy. Fabbers of the ass and the egg spear fender fat, her voa. Couched me in names, in ash dab, no, and you look both sur, the sim couched little bit so we. It in Easter Bucker was so, the surf sur, the sim serious, sim up, well, and him starp so. Fan last mossy. I'll now for still in him as it oil and see whether we've with them all longer vexed. Master fibro so I look in it off get. Smells in the soft marks in it and it's making it on the feet. Now I look skitch. Yes, does run that. Sense like so street. Mess like yes, if the net is got your foolish nick her bill was that fails in the west nick so and I am here fresh. In up there, go where the Snarf there was their old little mark beach to bash nims after that and a banner fat or bail der off airs dark the big so now we'll not eat the army. Na eat up. Na ship me color the from its dash. Wa make me and boots. As I now we'll not eat. If for the slots and as it up some of the fat or off wall or circle works it upstairs in Mickey. We had surfs in our numbers this look net yes and the skirts and the good see. The elf man net some Maat must the alcohol in them and Bahmet was naked muff. Fur, no my dizzy crossy. Love my scarf gay him get. Her fuss and the frock befell was not in a regular real more net. Her fuss such sort girk. Here treasure said the dry it's at a niche. Our that's that snell absol yam it here. Mazili's youngish enough. Snessing ours. Her locks in the burp net and ish power first nest says Ellen. One is a cash doll zero which said by 8 self missed. Her beat dog is lousy first as it is at and merking is neller not. Girls it girls cuts then it making it door off the even. Where thief singing her greenish nick is lower of mach noise. And I am losh cuts her that has a Sam her fifth one shot for snare if scrums they don't it girl when you was named D don't nether that bra off saying on the hood. Snail cutting is the verse where it's so again is a high Drop bars the old blocker the must net. Still full of bits and nose just do stabbing in it. Girls cuts do well I boys does the bob name that him. Snites and the half them the Sarah grips it in on face little bit in a beeler if the high look stomach for growing the scratch and the can enough. Her that she's the ass of not and I give no one no sturm and got later at the loss in the shelly portion in the ass and then sheriff's headless nine officer that's in the guilt citizen saw her. Snack the nice for our psilling them that seals some say even. No, if I honest them, they know where it's safe from her fault in that. Yeah, none of their own from Athena and you eat on her past their arts issue. Fish surfs in her glasses, happy her patch, don't I serve when I hit. Sheen was nimum, nimith will have surf for that's right, so. If looking at cat not at all, or even mixer elf merwin nimmer vagether the no fail on it. Snimum give swims, the master she first saw it. Market my fit that sense of moon with that verdict near as knee sealer as the elf was off in the ellen. Only here perhaps fisher the weenish nick on the sweeks in that as a year's gilloch as nerves and scarts is known gave it in their own thans sobs them without nerves in a panel wall full of deals in the sheriff's hiring a spot though name I know gil Vaj the model gives no muster from the machine on so that's why Smith Gaster after their work that or starter on a vixen a one but I seal it all shows stay as scrum yeah say there he meet a roll and if it agnosh the gets this up Snack nick passer grown scratch in the quill ups in a stoop those in the shit nick that brush or hams and the sizgison on the mistake. Girl some off nibda, a gillo, here cat lots gastel was not side das lying in night skate and the scratch nicker and that, or aching in out fun, no math, severe or nimbin up sich, don't wear skirt suit, and it's not weef as naked elves off in the ellen. Neither couch to tell in the market, and ever shift as any of the lungy game nibdu, while smart fall parts the ships the sun. Svessim gave those math to eat a mock up or a gil. Said that heel snapping mer from the people it net, where Steve is the ghosts miss it. It is sort of back at the start of card market. I give me do never weird fat zeal my fits is nivnickish. No panels never but the zivu. Well, all bad news. Sir, the sims that aim one, Nemo can I'm gonna and after fought eating extra punch shake that area, net barge dear cat from our baby was up the soul and now we'll give us a stick. Fjaller dat bevat uister ne agudner en vermohterish en refdid nox baza. Akbar old mebailu means law or no we noch nie nox of it never florget. On our good heil. Here's Simith, yeah, be your fault. What swims it veterans and left that scene of us nicht nyan. Heel wave, each meal mazering at the net surf that beshers nesters see whom's ears not get the touch bisu. So I gram nine nerf net as our either not all of our snap eight or off get bedil get silly root. Scene of us nicht nyan and it carried him left in a meal sherm healer morph net service eats and left floor vas finom. Segil when mammas it fair, feen of us nicht nyan, elvas off and the ellen him so air bull. Seven was throw seed escape in the engy game law, and a chuck nervous never was no kisses just forget when the moose is. Film as it was at, I am 7 spots at, safe did our schnitzer gill. Tell no I sniffed the car stealer was. Floss Rick's had up. Never as a deal bro, na gill was it. You'll get off with the flood sea, said there. Life in the slang at the net, and that's animal or umzier, my map does not. And that's nothing it must have chat as me say, the mile film. If honor the qua, perhaps a little what's them in it. My babas others, the grass yoshman, your never net, your daughter, voa, and the ship as a mammer from any lotu. Her stroker, the nishlof McFluss, must see summer. Is the scats diller, and it's lost in the bobs, and the nafas are oaks, stone it's in the chest or so it gilt. Snapshin up brother, yes, and the net one, the was all mazaraf, be caught in the look. Perks are sarfman, not a will sit, and the sheriff's hat video. Off darker. Wait, the witch surf has small, see they know it out. Na show me must nimic cautious kisnet. Oh, women off the shark from the strofes in that and the strof thug needle. My fifth hour delps, it's a whale heat of his apple, did up far of bops zero. You max the from the sheriff back in the oil lights and we said. Flas me honey, so I look for my sketch the snow off. Gals yarks baher. Said there's this it out. Machine is half birds, and it's a stall with nerves, is that in a sharps, because the inner not ermis snee, the needle. He will is ill bops, that all be moth. Moths and about sits a shung it ski. Why, when it, snow we fill off. Stead I grip. Why, you, that how it, now my cloth. Mars eater or net, her even no such, why, you, now I'm not out of, oh, her shrift nerf big gap, why, you, moth, bring it argus, that light of big it, there's big it, oh. Why, looks there's no lasty. Merely fat up so, near knock out, I need to if the thought I look, slash there one, but I only miss in that. Snemo Murphy Shane, I was a snidey. Soft and arts out of it for that and eat it. Why, look, that's the gill was in the scare ball, broke for bears in the path in it. Illy reef but such, come else is it. Surf, I see, was he, yes, if yes, and it's together and these snobs are. Nash did new sush, the amber carrier was a lot, and Earl Bishneen have a air feels girls, it off, but it's in the sush, it. Throws it a world. Sir, corrects either feet that met Miss Luff and I make is a harp, caps the sour law. One is the out. Here, what's if I'm our girl, but the dad is a dub. Skyrox is it. He didn't even get an arger, not selling them, but this is getting not yells, dash is there off us in the net. Her name gets silly, was not for the dad with all the harp. Why, look, not cat metal from any models, that is this little thing, so we slug our sail a lot. Snitty serpent, he developed it in stam, it catch the ellen, and but they'll walk and give off it us if I the ducks at say, was that a lot of doors. Snaps are not in the shin, carbon flips no out swamps, and on a cautious solution, and get little bubble as if ones or that. So if these bits are in yam, but don't not get cat of it or sits there. Says in a marzo, but yes, I'm out surf for the psa call in that. Skirsh the nurse not from the quail, no say it's name on saber. Well, grammar the language, that idea to up the mere fast version at or fiercer than the daisy. And life and the reeler and I care absorbs it allows that. Said the law. Small sheets certainly believe in that allows that. Say it fifth as a martel and not lumps, the wheel on it, and I have as a circle choice, it's all from lift. Her opposite cassette snag up as nights net. Mess nerves off, because delver, but not here markets muck. Sack was nerve. Here, bruh, net of all surfaces near scary, he might. Said a dark net, and the shits are we see up not beating him, and it's the even a max name, my years off me game life, and her surface courage it. It's no knife, up the so back, get out food from the says it's dark, bar, bats and actually room sipping, seeing it darkness hut. Sealery because my life is near with her end. She'll not have as it upset that all week, but all could look with the shation is a barbed carriage during the viciousness. First, nothing needs to be lawyerish, and fast word again that there was tonight. Sparks the Lord. Small knives or sness. And now we did no wish. Sness out in the vessy under not a wall, will shrum near. Still, scat me after was it. I be voon the door from the absurd opposite. Merch nick a surf mini, me. Nasje de lacht net old Leela roep mag je besteed hebben zo schneem dat mijn zelfs de lacht me op dit keller ik mis bladet ik bij op het sealer waar je het niet wil verscheen dat net is er naar het surf op zes gezingers maar wat ik wil kunnen lucht bezat eerst nachts in een medium really bach beels nemen en het de drager zeeuw dat zo kram Sauen is gezegd bij er weg net neem schil bij het zeg net op de apps net die zaal in murf niet hoef niet net scissors schreef ja en zo net en als girlfriend terug bij samen na eel en vet niet wacht en nemers dit ben ik ooit die was niet niet alle schram zo middag zo kram nee durf niet zo smash de bedrijf zit dit help voor niet voor als het zo Serieusly, ben ik niet meer van life. Niet echt heel veel is hier, net. Zo, ik heb dus dat wel los naar ik nee, ik zeg als lach ze die repassion heeft net en is de wheel hebt nou of niet zo gezien net serieus net zie de mag ze maar zo bits dan ook steeds gezeler ieder maal het is niet ook de zeer dat is zeer te nedel dat het moet ze zei dus de sneef wel vind ik game life gets hem niet te see what very fairly pachtel maar ze lay roam niet net nog mingus nou wat zijn life niet wel Lassie, maar ze peeks de snammoest. Zie we me zijn even snammoest zit. Snare heeft gewoon schande, snedel er net we niet pas homer wat zijn life eer gedavi. Daar was er juist niet nog nog. Sorry, zo met vlas en oog is naar haar met nog zie we me meal op charvel pakken net er zuider bedoor vawa. Er zo is er juist net. Sir schip me aan. Maar van de schaalker wat ze henne. Ze is nee maar net ze maar de lammer vast surfs daar was het surf net. Saas gesef als kapberry. Maar je wil echt net early nil ram zingen voor het paes ne was niet aan net zie we maar schon niet game na give Maar voor van de schaap zingen niet die rats macht das arp we mag bij er op zo is Meel gewoon schijner ne earth cover de tarps maar fuist saal of zich net net skedder wat wil surf